They were outnumbered 5 to 1, surrounded by minefields, anti-tank ditches, artillery, and wave after wave of Soviet soldiers. The men of the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte marched toward the front with eyes wide open. What waited for them at Kursk was not just a battlefield, it was the very edge of human endurance. This wasn't a fight for land, it was a fight against fate itself. Against all odds, men led their armoured battalions into the abyss, where fire met steel and where the laws of nature seemed to break. This was more than the largest tank battle in history. It was the last desperate offensive of a war-weary Reich, an operation prepared with cold precision in the occupied villages near Kharkov. The Leibstandarte had trained for months, sharpening its weapons, perfecting its formations. And when the order came, they struck with fury. Their assault would tear into the Soviet lines like a spear through flesh, fast, brutal and merciless. But for all their strength, for all their fanatic will, even the elite could not escape the firestorm waiting ahead. This is the story the textbooks leave out, the untold offensive, the forgotten agony. This is the true story of the Leibstandarte at Kursk. In the early spring of 1943, as the snows melted and the Eastern Front momentarily stabilized, the German High Command set its sights on a bold offensive operation, one that would become infamous as the largest tank battle in history. At the heart of this plan stood the 1st SS Panzer Division Leibstandarte Adolf Hitler, the elite bodyguard division of the Führer himself. Though battered by previous engagements, particularly the brutal winter fighting around Kharkov, the division was now tasked with rearming, refitting and preparing for the next decisive strike against the Soviet Union. This was the calm before the storm, and in villages surrounding Kharkov, the groundwork was quietly being laid for Operation Citadel. The process began on the 1st of April 1943. The Leibstandarte reorganized its Panzer Grenadier regiments, integrating replacements and rotating companies through field exercises. Hundreds of new vehicles and personnel were brought in, transforming the division into a mechanized spearhead once more. The anti-tank battalion and armored reconnaissance detachments were expanded and re-equipped with newer, more advanced models. Training intensified. Under the leadership of commanders like SS Standartenführer Joachim Peiper, tactics were refined down to the smallest detail. The division's panzer companies drilled assault techniques day after day, learning to maneuver in tight formations across Ukrainian farmlands, supported by mobile infantry and engineer units designed to clear mines and obstacles. Kleinovoye, a small town to the west of Kharkov, became a central hub for staging and regrouping. PC units moved into the village, and their crews were billeted in civilian homes. The relationship between soldiers and locals was tense but civil. Peiper himself stayed in the home of a Russian couple. The atmosphere was quiet but uncertain. Ukrainian civilians, many of whom had already suffered greatly in the war, watched from their homes as German soldiers sharpened their blades. Some interactions were surprisingly routine. Village women washing laundry in exchange for bread, children peeking out of barns as Tiger tanks rumbled past. But no one forgot that this was occupied territory. Soviet partisans lurked in nearby forests, and there was always the threat of sudden violence. By late April, the division was working at full speed. Engineers dug trenches and reinforced defensive positions around command centres, while maintenance crews overhauled damaged tanks. Meanwhile, tactical planning reached fever pitch. The 1st SS Panzer Regiment practiced live fire exercises with its Panzer Vs and Tigers, supported by half-tracks and artillery. Newly arrived formations were trained to fight side by side with hardened veterans. It was here that the true nature of the Waffen-SS became visible. Not merely soldiers, but a military machine forged by ideology, discipline, and ruthless experience. Unlike regular army units, they were bound not only by orders, but by fanatic loyalty to the cause and to one another. Unit structures were reshuffled. The regiments were spread across multiple villages to avoid drawing attention, and commanders fine-tuned their formations down to the company level. Motorized infantry battalions were paired with armored assault units, supported by reconnaissance vehicles, engineers, and medical staff. Special emphasis was placed on fast communication and combined arms strategy. Radio operators trained day and night, simulating combat situations where coordination with tanks and artillery could make the difference between a breakthrough or annihilation. In the background, the specter of Soviet resistance loomed. Reconnaissance flights confirmed that the Red Army was building deep defensive belts, minefields, trenches, anti-tank ditches, and fortified bunkers stretching for miles. The Germans knew this would not be easy. Still, the soldiers made time for moments of normalcy. Some played football on village fields, others wrote letters home. New recruits arrived in droves, many from the Hitler Youth or from rear echelon units, now thrust into the front lines of the Eastern Front. Some were overwhelmed by the scale of the war they were entering. Others found themselves inspired by the iron discipline of men like Peiper and Dietrich. The divisions of the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, Leibstandarte, Das Reich and Totenkopf, were no longer just elite. They were the armoured fist of Hitler's last grand offensive. By early June, the division had reached full operational strength. Peiper's battalion was fully manned, with 36 assault vehicles and supporting elements under his direct command. Commanders met daily, refining orders and aligning their strike strategy with the broader goals of Army Group South. Reports from Berlin stressed the importance of surprise and speed. Time was no longer on Germany's side. The Soviets were gaining strength, the Allies had landed in North Africa, and the clock was ticking. The soldiers felt it, morale was high, but there was tension in the air, an awareness that something enormous was coming. The High Command delayed the start of the operation multiple times. Hitler himself was torn, unsure whether to commit to the assault or wait for newer tanks to arrive. But in the fields outside Kharkov, the men could wait no longer. They trained harder, they ran drills in blazing heat, they stripped and cleaned their weapons under moonlight, and each morning they looked east, knowing that soon the horizon would be lit with fire. Finally, by the end of June, the signal came down. Officers were recalled to Sepp Dietrich's headquarters to receive their orders. The time had come. Operation Citadel would begin in the first days of July. On 30 June 1943, regimental and battalion commanders met once more. Peiper, never one to leave details unchecked, reminded officers to pack personal effects, mark all vehicles, and finalize communications. This was the final breath before the plunge. The last week of quiet before the fields of Prokhorovka and the plains of Kursk were scorched in the largest tank battle the world had ever seen. First of July 1943, Jochen Peiper's Armoured Personnel Carrier Battalion was formally attached to the division's armoured group as a tactical strike force. This wasn't a symbolic move, it was a structural decision rooted in evolving Waffen-SS Panzer doctrine. By this point in the war, the Germans had refined their armoured tactics. In the idealized theory of blitzkrieg, tanks, mechanized infantry, assault guns, reconnaissance units, engineers, and mobile artillery were no longer to operate independently. Instead, they would be forged into flexible, high-speed armoured groups led by seasoned commanders. These combined armed strike forces, mobile, concentrated, and lethal, became the backbone of SS Panzer doctrine. And when these groups were committed, particularly under commanders like Peiper, they often brought localized breakthroughs even in the final years of the war. The Leibstandarte, forged in blood from Poland to France and hardened in the East, had become one of the finest examples of this doctrine in action. At the opening of Operation Citadel, the Leibstandarte's armoured battle group was composed of Peiper's APC battalion, the 2nd Battalion of the 1st SS Panzer Regiment, one company from the anti-tank battalion, the 2nd Battalion of the SS Artillery Regiment, and No. 6 Company from the SS Flak Battalion. The fighting force was formidable, mobile, and tactically cohesive. The commander of No. 14 Company noted in his diary, "We moved out at 0500 hours. My fighting force is large, 18 Panzers. The torrential rain from last night has passed, but the roll barn is still soft. 2 tanks were left behind. Otherwise, fortune accompanied us to Kurusha. We arrived at nightfall. By morning, we make our next leap forward. In the early hours of 2 July, Peiper's APC battalion reached the assigned readiness area. There at midday, he held a situation conference outlining the final details of the assault. His officers were briefed on timing, routes, and objectives. The men, now bivouacked in tents beneath the summer sun, knew that the long-awaited moment was approaching. On the 3rd of July, in rare but beautiful weather, the battalion shared a hastily organised feast, a spontaneous celebration that revealed the underlying morale of Peiper's unit. The men ate heartily, sang softly, and prepared themselves for what they all knew was coming. In war, moments like this were rare. Many suspected it would be their last. The Kursk offensive had its roots in strategic necessity. By spring 1943, Germany could no longer sustain the momentum of its earlier campaigns. The Red Army had dug in deeply. Hitler, faced with the reality of Allied landings in North Africa, mounting Soviet resistance, and dwindling resources, needed a decisive blow. Operation Citadel was meant to deliver that blow. After the capture of Belgorod earlier in the year, a vast 200-kilometre wide gap had opened between Army Group Centre and Army Group South. The Kursk salient, a massive Soviet bulge into German lines, offered an opportunity. If it could be encircled and crushed, German forces would shorten their lines, recapture the initiative, and deal the Soviets a psychological and operational defeat. It was originally intended to launch by mid-May. But repeated delays, especially in the delivery of new tanks and equipment, pushed the operation further into the summer, buying the Soviets precious time. The Leibstandarte, under the command of Sepp Dietrich and now part of General Hausser's 2nd SS Panzer Corps, was placed under 4th Panzer Army led by Hermann Holtz. Their mission was to form the southern pincer of the attack, but complications remained. The 1st Battalion of the SS Panzer Regiment, still in Germany converting to the Panther tank, was unavailable. As a result, the Leibstandarte fielded only the 3 companies of the 2nd Battalion number, 13 Tiger Company and number 14 Pioneer Company. The self-propelled artillery battalion, recently strengthened with 10.5 cm assault howitzers, and the anti-tank battalion were also present. As of 2nd July, the division had 11 Tigers, 72 Panzer IVs, 16 Panzer IIIs and a 2s, and 31 SP guns available. Most units had already advanced by 1st July, reaching its final readiness position late on the night of July 4th. As of 2nd July, the division had 11 Tigers, 72 Panzer IVs, 16 Panzer IIIs and 2s, and 31 SP guns available. Most units had already advanced by 1st July. Peiper's armoured group arrived last, reaching its final readiness position late on the night of July 4th. But while the Germans organised, the Soviets had transformed the terrain. Stalin's generals had anticipated the German plan for months. Defensive preparations were immense. In the Kursk salient alone, the Soviets had dug more than 9,000 kilometres of trenches. 8 defensive lines, layered with barbed wire, anti-tank ditches, bunkers and kill zones, extended for hundreds of kilometres in depth. Every rifle company was assigned anti-tank teams. Camouflaged gun nests, petrol bomb squads, limpet mines, and even tank turrets buried to serve as static bunkers dotted the landscape. The Red Army had deployed thousands of 5.7 cm anti-tank guns, Stalin organs, multiple rocket launchers, T-34s, KV tanks and SP guns. Soviet artillery and armour were in depth, well hidden and heavily reinforced. German reconnaissance reported at least 212 tanks directly facing the Leibstandarte sector. The 81st Rifle Division alone had laid over 2,100 anti-tank mines and nearly the same number of anti-personnel charges in its zone. German High Command planned to wipe out enemy advanced sentries at 2300 hours on 4 July, launching coordinated air and artillery strikes before the main assault. The divisional order specified that the initial breach would be made by assault troops following concentrated artillery and Luftwaffe bombing. Stuka dive bombers would strike at key Soviet strongpoints at 0400 hours, coinciding with an increased artillery bombardment that would hammer the line until the final moment of the infantry's advance. Tigers and SP guns would provide fire cover, shielding grenadiers as they pushed forward. Peiper's armoured group, minus the Tiger Company and No. 1 Company, would remain in readiness to break through Soviet anti-tank strongpoints east of Prokhorovka, then push northeast toward Yakovlevo to secure a bridgehead over the Sel River. The coordination with the 8th Air Corps was tight. Timing was everything. There could be no delay, no confusion. The troops knew this. At 0900 hours on the 4th of July, SS Untersturmführer Gurs attended the operational conference with Lieutenant Colonel Schönberger and Peiper. In his diary he wrote, "I have updated my maps. The fever of the hunt is gripping me. Will we pull it off as planned? We must brace ourselves. May fortune accompany us. Around me, general enthusiasm is growing. The tank gun platoon is singing songs. The infantry gun platoon is calibrating its MGs. We are to set off at 2100 hours. The homeland will soon hear that we remain strong. We are all proud to be part of it, and I am glad." Everyone knew what tomorrow would bring. Tension gripped every Panzer grenadier. Many said nothing, only stared into the distance, caught in their thoughts. They understood the stakes. They knew what awaited them beyond the trenches. And in the silence before the thunder, each man asked himself the same question. Would he still be alive when the sun rose? Because for many of them, 5th July 1943 would be their last day. Around midnight on July 4th, 1943, the opening blow of the Battle of Kursk began in brutal close-quarters combat. Advanced Russian sentries had dug in deeply across the front, and German assault troops were forced to eliminate them with bayonets, grenades, and rifle fire in the dark. It was a silent, savage beginning, the storm before the full fury. Among those waiting just behind the lines was Jochen Peiper. Restless, focused and intense, he stood by his staff, prepared to move the moment the order came. His adjutant, SS Untersturmführer Werner Wolf, used the final calm to write a letter to his girlfriend Helga back home in Memel, East Prussia. It was not a goodbye, but the kind of letter written by a man who knew what might happen in the hours to come. In it, he spoke of how the Russian artillery was already firing, but that it didn't trouble him much. His thoughts were with her. He confessed he had to push her from his mind now, just temporarily, to face what lay ahead. Around him, men were quietly holding photos of loved ones, some making peace, others finding strength. "I cannot think coldly or soberly," he wrote, "but I believe in Germany and in you." At 0405 hours on 5 July 1943, the order was given. The two SS Panzer Grenadier regiments of the Leibstandarte surged forward. Before them lay 25 kilometers of fortified Soviet terrain, minefields, barbed wire, concealed bunkers and deep trenches. The advance was led by the 2nd Regiment under SS Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Krass and the 1st Battalion of the 1st Regiment. Under heavy Soviet shellfire from across the Worskla River, they fought forward. Engineers laying bridges across anti-tank ditches under fire. With the support of Tigers and self-propelled guns, the men of the 2nd Regiment stormed Hill 220.5 after 5 hours of grinding combat. By midday, they had also seized Hill 217.1 to the northeast, using the height to support the neighbouring 1st SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment. Soon after, both regiments pressed forward and jointly occupied the village of Prokhorovka. Peiper's armoured group had been held in reserve, waiting for the right moment. It wasn't until 14:30 hours that the order arrived. They were to advance through the Soviet lines east of Yakovlevo and establish a bridgehead over the Sel River. At 1800 hours, his panzers and armoured carriers finally rolled forward, crossing the front at point 234.8. But as dawn approached near Yakovlevo, the spearhead came face to face with a dense anti-tank front. Division ordered a halt. The advance had stalled. From the field, Gurs, one of Peiper's company commanders, recorded his impressions of the day. "It was 11 o'clock and hot," he wrote. "We were still in the readiness area, camouflaged well in a small wood. Overhead, Soviet aircraft swarmed. The air was heavy, with Russian planes the worst I'd seen. The bombardment had begun at 0300, but then it stopped. It seemed our infantry had gained ground. The shelling on our sector fell quiet." By early afternoon, the armoured group received its signal. The infantry had broken the first barrier. Now it was time to move. Russian defenders responded with flamethrowers and fierce resistance. The advance was slow and costly. Mines took a toll. 3 of Captain Kling's Tigers, broke through the first enemy lines, paving the way for the rest of the group. The first casualties fell on the approach route, hit by Soviet artillery. At 1800, the armoured column pushed through cornfields, valleys, and across uplands. As dusk fell, the second line came into view, and it was stronger. Russian anti-tank fire erupted across the line, catching the German vehicles in exposed positions. They were ordered to dig in for the night. Gurs formed up his company and shared a trench with Buhr. That evening, Peiper himself briefed the commanders. A tank counterattack was likely. At that moment, Soviet aircraft roared overhead, strafing the trenches and dropping bombs. The same old stuff, Gurs noted, but it's still hard to get used to it. Parachute flares lit up the night sky, casting an eerie glow over the battlefield. The division advanced as one rolling wave of steel. Tigers, Panzer IVs, SP guns, APCs, flak and grills surged together, amphibious vehicles and command Kübelwagens riding in the rear. The attack continued through the night. Gurs was wounded by shrapnel in the hand, but refused treatment. "This kind of warfare demands lightning-fast reactions," he said. "If an APC was hit, anyone who could bailed out and kept moving." It rained for 2 hours in the night. The men slept in their vehicles. Around 0500 hours on the 6th of July, Soviet artillery and tanks opened up on the German position. The Stukas were called in, the sky filled with howling dive bombers descending on enemy lines. Later that morning, Frey's 1st SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment launched an assault on Hill 243.2 east of Jakovlevo. They stormed it in close combat at 0945 hours, breaking through mined and fortified ground. By 1330 hours, they had also taken Hill 230.5, terrain critical for the armoured group's next phase. SS Brigade Führer Theodor Wisch led the attack of the armoured group personally through Luchki North and Tetrovino, pushing into the Cell sector. At 1315 and 1400 hours, Soviet tanks launched counterattacks against both regiments. The first was stopped cold by the armoured group. 8 Russian tanks were destroyed and the enemy retreated. SS Captain Heinz Kling, leading the Tiger Company, immediately pressed the advantage. Charging forward without hesitation, he led the armoured group in a dash that broke into the high ground west of Prokhorovka, bringing the spearhead 60 to 70 kilometers deep into enemy territory. Over the course of these 2 days, his Tigers destroyed 50 T-34s, 2 KV tanks and over 40 anti-tank guns of varying calibers. Meanwhile, the APC battalion reached a hill southwest of Tetrovino. From there, they advanced onto higher ground north of the village. Gurs, participating in the battle personally, was awarded his 29th close combat day. "We were facing a well-defended strong point," he recalled. "Over midday, the infantry stormed it. Hats off to them. But we suffered. Schellhorn was killed, Mews wounded, 6 others down, and this wasn't even the full attack yet." By afternoon, the Soviets attempted to retake the ground. A full tank brigade hit the German flank. The panzer crews met the challenge head-on. It was the Leibstandarte's first major tank engagement of the battle. Gurs, watching from a ridge, later said, "It was really something." As night approached, the battalion was ordered to prepare for another push northeast. Recon elements and panzer units were already moving. The column advanced rapidly toward the Cell, flanked left and right by armour. But the road was mined. Tanks hit one after another. The APC of the Luftwaffe liaison officer was destroyed in flames. Darkness closed in, and with anti-tank guns and enemy armour ahead, the order was given: halt and hold. The ground gained would have to be defended. That night, they dug in. The front was wide, the flanks vulnerable. Gurs returned to battalion command late in the evening. He lay down at midnight, uncertain what tomorrow would bring, but Tetrovino was still in German hands for now. At 1300 hours on the night of the 6th of July, a tense message came through from No. 12 Company. Lieutenant Preuss reported spotting 6 Russian tanks looming in the darkness. Moments later, No. 13 Company confirmed that more tanks were visible in their sector. It was uncertain whether this was a probing attack or the beginning of a full Soviet counterstrike, and yet strangely there was no panic. The men, hardened by years of brutal campaigning, quietly took to their weapons. The attack came swiftly and the firefight raged into the early hours of the morning. In the end, the Russians were driven back. 5 of their 16 T-34s lay burning. 6 Soviet crewmen surrendered. They revealed they were from an armoured corps rushed in from Moscow on the 5th of July, the last reserves. That detail sent a murmur through the ranks. Perhaps the Red Army was already reaching into its final depth. During the night, an incredible event unfolded. 3 Soviet tanks, infantry riding on their hulls, charged blindly through the German line in a reckless manoeuvre. One of Captain Kling's Tigers stood watch in the shadows along a narrow road. In one deafening volley, he obliterated all 3 tanks at point-blank range, just 10 meters. The night swallowed the chaos and dawn brought silence once more. By the morning of 7th July, the Leibstandarte held a solid line, Teteravino north, Luchki north, Prokhorovka east, and a point 2 kilometers west of Ulyanov. The 1st SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment seized both Prokhorovka and Yakovlevo in fierce fighting. At Luchki, several Soviet counterattacks were repulsed, including waves of tanks that pushed forward from the direction of Oboyan. Luftwaffe support was relentless. Stukas screamed across the sky, tearing through Soviet armour and supply lines. At 0600 hours, following additional strikes on the Teteravino Rollbahn, the APC battalion and the Leibstandarte's armoured group began their advance toward Prokhorovka. By 0710, they encountered Soviet armour pushing down from the north and northeast. A sharp engagement followed and raged until midday before the enemy retreated. In the field, Gurs continued to record the intensity of the fighting. "It's impossible to describe it all," he wrote. "We shot down a reconnaissance plane. Again, that happens 10 times a day. The Russians had cut us off, but nobody panicked. We felt superior." To the right of his position, Major Teichson of Das Reich's 2nd Battalion engaged Soviet tanks and wiped out 35. Later that day, Gurs washed for the first time in 5 days. The heat was unbearable. His company sheltered in a nearby fruit orchard. That afternoon, a German reconnaissance plane reported a new concentration of enemy armour behind the ridge, 35 Soviet tanks preparing for another assault. Sitting beside Peiper and SS Major Gross, the men reviewed the options. Gross immediately attacked with his Panzers, catching the Soviets before they could strike. 16 tanks were destroyed, without a single loss. That night, during a command conference at 2200 hours, new orders were issued. The group would attack again in the morning, pushing westward to eliminate massed tank formations, threatening the flank of 2nd SS Panzer Corps. The Leibstandarte now held the line from Luchki north through Jablochki, Bolmayachki and Prokhorovka. In just 3 days, the division had destroyed 123 Soviet tanks, 37 guns and 12 aircraft. But the pressure was increasing. Soviet armour was beginning to encircle from both sides. In response, the 4th Panzer Army made the decision to unleash its remaining forces against the Soviet massing to the north. At 0800 hours on the 8th of July, the armoured group set off northwest. Just over an hour later, near Wesely, they encountered a formidable Soviet armoured force, at least 40 tanks. The battle exploded at 0920 and lasted an hour. After regrouping, the Germans resumed their push, recommencing the battle for Wesely at 12:05. Gurs later described it in vivid detail. "It was midday when things really started," he wrote. "We were the second wave behind the Panzers. At first we captured the village, but then things turned difficult. Tanks dug in anti-tank guns, infantry everywhere. The road ahead was blocked. To their left and right, Soviet forces were closing in. Even the village they had launched from was now under attack. 35 Soviet tanks had circled behind them. The German infantry had no tanks of their own nearby for support. Behind the ridge, Peiper coordinated the response. 2 Tigers that had stayed behind at Teteravino due to mechanical failure held their ground. When Soviet tanks pushed into the town, those 2 vehicles annihilated them all, a feat Gurs later described as unbelievable. Peiper quickly took command and ordered an immediate counterattack on Rilsklei. His battle group, a mixed formation of Panzers and Panzer Grenadiers, surged forward. Now the Panzers would see how we Panzer Grenadiers attack, Gers wrote. They stormed ahead at speed. Over the radio, Peiper's voice barked through the headphones. Go, Gers, go! Want, keep pushing. Forward. The armoured personnel carriers hurtled across the fields. Speed was their only advantage. They used it to the fullest. As they neared the village, Soviet fire intensified. Explosions erupted on all sides. Gers issued orders via microphone. Deaf to the sounds of battle, smoke was laid to cover the advance, but at just 500 meters from the objective, 2 Russian tanks charged through the fog, firing wildly. Gers ordered a retreat to a shallow depression for cover. The lieutenant commanding the smoke battery was killed instantly by a direct hit. Gers and No. 11 Company shifted to cover the flanks, but the panzers behind them couldn't keep pace. As darkness began to fall, Gers saw 17 Soviet tanks ahead at 1,500 meters. One opened fire, a near miss. He immediately ordered his 6 Grill self-propelled guns to open fire. Grills are murderous, he said. As the guns roared, he attempted to reach command by radio. Reception failed. Finally, Preuss of No. 12 Company responded. They coordinated positions using star shells. Captured prisoners revealed that the ridge had housed 80 Soviet tanks. Most fled when confronted by a small group of German grenadiers. One Tiger had destroyed 14 tanks by itself during the battle. By the time Gers reached Peiper at 2000 hours, the heat was suffocating and rain had begun to fall again. At 2100 hours, the armoured group pulled back to Luchki North to rest. That day, the Tiger Company had once again distinguished itself. Kling, operating on the flank with just 4 Tigers, had destroyed multiple dug-in tanks. Coordinating with APC elements, he launched a rearward strike that forced Soviet armour to retreat in confusion. The Tigers destroyed 45 tanks that day alone. Gers's untreated hand wound had worsened, and he was finally pulled off the line to a dressing station, where he remained until the 10th. Elsewhere, SS Captain Gül captured 31 enemy tanks. The total number destroyed by the Leibstandarte on 8th July alone was 82, but supply lines were becoming impossible to maintain. Soviet armour constantly cut off rear routes, ambushing fuel and ammunition convoys. The armoured group was ordered to pull back behind the divisional front line to regroup. The APC battalion rested at Luchki. Meanwhile, the 1st SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment reached Relskli without opposition. SS Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Krass, commander of the 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, captured the moment best in his field report. The enemy knows what he's up against and is gambling all on one card. He throws everything at us with diabolical intensity. A massive tank battle is building, and with all our strength we will achieve the impossible. The previous days had proven it. When Panzer Grenadiers in armoured carriers moved in concert with Panzers, they could punch through even the most heavily defended Soviet positions. Officers from across the Waffen-SS had now adopted this flexible, high-speed tactic. The importance of coordination and the ability to control movement by radio in real time gave commanders an edge that could mean life or death. Finally, the Panzer Arm had what it needed: speed, firepower, and the hardened infantry to match it. And the Battle of Kursk was far from over. Through fire and exhaustion, through dust, blood and silence, the bond between the Panzers and the men who followed them grew unbreakable. Very close cooperation between tankers and Panzer Grenadiers built trust, not only through shared danger but through shared rhythm. On the battlefield, the speed of war demanded radio contact, runners, split-second decisions. Peiper, now a veteran of every major campaign since France, was the master of it. He could take in a shifting front and deliver a single radio order that changed the course of an entire fight. When enemy armour was spotted, the coordination between APC-mounted grenadiers and tanks was not just effective, it was overwhelming. On 10th July 1943, despite still not having full use of 2 fingers on his right hand, Gers climbed back into Kenzia's grill as the gun layer. At 10:45 hours, the Leibstandarte launched its next attack, pushing forward with the 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment. The APC battalion had been holding at Teterovino, waiting for the breakthrough to be completed so they could move north toward Prokhorovka. That day, the objective was the eastern approach to the village. The ground gained was hard-won. The 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 2nd Regiment were pinned down by heavy artillery fire from elevated Soviet positions north of the Sel River. Despite the punishing bombardment, 2nd Battalion pressed forward, seizing Hill 241.6 with the support of Tigers and self-propelled guns. Soviet resistance was brutal, and the heights had been fortified with dug-in tanks and concealed strongpoints. During the engagement, Peiper's adjutant Werner Wolf personally destroyed a T-34 in close combat, but not without loss. His staff officer, SS2/Lieutenant Günther Hülsen, was killed. In a mark of loyalty and tradition, the division's administrative officer, SS Captain Herbert Molt, requested to take Hülsen's place. The 6 grills of the platoon proved deadly in the terrain. They followed just behind the APC battalion, their 15-centimeter guns shattering field positions, artillery nests and Soviet bunkers. Though they lacked dedicated rangefinders, the gunners, all veterans of the heavy machine gun platoons, fired with instinct and brutal precision. Without optics, they judged distance with their own eyes, using thumb and forefinger to align the gun. Some missed, but the experienced rarely did. Each grill was loaded with as much ammunition as could be crammed into the chassis, AP rounds, high explosive shells, and the massive 30-centimeter bunker busters, capable of tearing through concrete with a 54-kilogram warhead. There was no time for luxury, no time for safety. These monsters had to be hand-loaded from outside the vehicle. Under fire, that meant death. On the 11th of July 1943, the 1st and 2nd Battalions of the 2nd Regiment launched another assault toward Prokhorovka. The terrain was difficult. Ahead stood Hill 252.2, a key Soviet position, after Stuka dive bombers raked the enemy lines. The 2nd Regiment and the division's reconnaissance battalion moved in at 0905 hours. Fighting was fierce and close. Supported by Tigers and SP guns, the 2nd Battalion captured the northern slope of Hill 252.2. On the lower ridge, a section of the anti-tank ditch was overrun by SS Captain Becker's 1st Battalion. Engineers laid down bridges. At 10:15, Peiper's armoured group was ordered forward. By 12:30, the Panzers and APCs had crossed the ditch and smashed into the southern slope of the hill. Hand-to-hand combat followed. Shells tore the sky, grenades rolled down trenches. Peiper's entire battalion was thrown into the melee. For his role in the fight that day, Gers was awarded his 30th Close Combat Day. He had earned every one. The Stuka direction officer accompanied the assault from Peiper's own APC. But fate was cruel. During a dive-bombing run over Stublushch, Oktyabrski, his own vehicle, was hit. The officer and his crew were killed instantly. 3 Tigers pressed on toward the hill west of Prokhorovka, destroying 28 Soviet anti-tank and field guns. But momentum faltered, the flanks were unprotected, other divisions hadn't caught up. By 1450 hours, the Leibstandarte had outrun its support, the advance halted. Along a line stretching from Staroshevoy west to the edge of the wood near Swak, Oktyabrski, they held alone. SS Grenadier Erich Scherbel of No. 11 Company remembered it vividly. Just before noon, a thunderstorm rolled in. Torrential rain fell across the battlefield. "We attacked but were stopped," he said. "The enemy was too strong. Mines had to be cleared. Then our APC was hit." A Soviet anti-tank round punched through the hatch. Corporal Willy Bott was fatally wounded. Schobel, the co-driver, was hit in the chest, bleeding badly. Yet, he remained in control. Gül, his commander, ordered the damaged APC to return to supply lines with Bott and the wounded, and Schobel drove despite his injury. That same day, Gül himself was wounded. A shell fragment tore into his thigh. Dr. Bremy at the temporary dressing station removed the fragment and cooled the wound. By the next day, Gül was back at the front. Lieutenant Preuss, commander of No. 12 Company, was shot through the neck and evacuated to the Corps Hospital in Kharkov. Near the anti-tank ditch, the grill platoon was taking fire. Rocket launchers fired screaming missiles towards Soviet lines, but the enemy responded with furious artillery. SS Sergeant Bernd von Bergmann and company runner Grenadier Schwanke were wounded. Gun Captain SS Corporal Bachmann was killed. SS Captain Dr. Bristol, the battalion surgeon, was also wounded, but refused to leave his men. SS Captain Herbert Molt, who had stepped in to replace Hulsen, was killed later that day on a motorcycle journey near the front. That evening, war correspondent Dr. Herbert Schramm penned a draft article from the forward position of Peiper's battalion. He described it simply: 7 days of attack, 7 days of close combat for every field, every trench, every tank ditch, 7 days of heat and sudden rain, of screaming metal and craters, of Stukas and sewing machine bombers, of panzer engines grinding, machine guns hammering, flak howling, orders roaring and men crying out. He went on. 7 nights, blazing with artillery, cut by bombers hunting for supply lines. In these nights, minutes lasted hours. It feels like this battle began only yesterday, but already we've fought through Ruchny Wood, the Rollbun, Red Height, the tank cemetery, and still the enemy stands, still the ground drinks our blood. As dusk fell on the 11th of July, the APCs of Peiper's battalion were parked in the shell-pocked trenches once dug by Soviet hands. The men were thankful. For once, they wouldn't need to dig their own graves in the earth. But even with this small comfort, there was no joy, least of all for Peiper, who paced between the trenches, seething. The moment had come for pursuit, for the final shattering blow. The way forward was open, and then the order came down from above. Halt. Just as victory lay within reach, the advance was frozen. As the artillery barrage subsided, the accompanying panzers remained silent, following strict orders not to fire, even when visible enemy targets appeared. The advance had to be restrained. Higher command had issued a clear directive. Short steps. Wait for the neighbouring divisions. You're too far forward. The momentum stalled, not for lack of will, but due to the wider coordination of the front. Within the ranks of Peiper's battalion, disappointment was palpable. His men had come to expect rapid, aggressive action, the kind of thrust that had made their commander's name legendary. The battalion was proud of its unique role, its integrated armour and mechanized infantry, and the specialized tasks it had been assigned. Yet, in this war on the Eastern Front, opportunities to prove oneself came often, and came hard. There would be no shortage of action. Elsewhere, Panzer grenadiers swept the trenches, pulling out Soviet troops who had remained behind. Some surrendered with nervous grins, knowing resistance was futile. In one trench lay the body of a fallen Soviet commissar. He was moved to the side of the slope, his bloodied tunic still bearing the bright red enamel of the Order of Lenin. Nearby, captured submachine guns and automatic rifles were collected into piles. A long Soviet anti-tank gun was allocated to each transport lorry for later inspection or redeployment. As night fell, the rugged field kitchens arrived. After days of rain and fighting, even a spoonful of hot soup brought a sense of relief. The sentries were posted. The men of the company troops settled into a crude bunker, grateful for even the simplest shelter. Outside, the air was thick with the scent of the soaked steppe, wild herbs, crushed vegetation, and damp earth. The rain had passed, and the battlefield now exhaled the smells of thyme, peppermint, and chamomile. For a moment, lungs could breathe freely again after the choking smoke and fumes of shell fire. The front grew quiet. Men lay down to rest, weapons at their side, steel helmets under their heads, surrounded by the fading echoes of battle. That evening, one of the grill crews discovered that their gun sight had been damaged. It was already too dark to attempt repairs. They would have to face the next day's fighting blind. On the 12th of July 1943, the plains around Prokhorovka erupted into chaos. This date would go down in history as the day of the greatest tank battle the world had ever seen. At dawn, more than 150 Soviet tanks smashed through the front lines and surged toward the positions of Peiper's APC battalion on Hill 252.2 and the 1st SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment at W. Stalinskans. The Soviet 5th Guards Tank Army had been unleashed in full force. The night before, German forces had seized the hill after fierce fighting, forcing Soviet troops from their trenches. The Leibstandarte men now held those same positions. As the sun rose, they were hit without warning. Aircraft screamed overhead, followed by a wall of steel. 148 Soviet tanks in a single wave. Infantry clung to their hulls, pouring gunfire into the German lines as they drove directly into the trenches. The battalion was caught in its sleep. Grenadiers leapt into action, grabbing limpet charges from their APCs and hurling them at any target they could reach. It was hand-to-hand combat across a battlefield of smoke, fire and confusion. By 0900, Peiper's men had repelled the assault, holding Hill 252.2. One company alone had destroyed 15 Soviet tanks. The Grill's self-propelled guns had been positioned near the anti-tank ditch that morning. Soviet armour tore toward them at full speed. Shells exploded in every direction. Despite a damaged gun sight, one gunner managed to knock out 2 T-34s at a range of over 1,000 meters. It was blind estimation and deadly luck. SS 2nd Lieutenant Otto Bolk, commander of the Grill platoon, was wounded by a massive chunk of shrapnel and later died of his injuries in Kharkov. During the fight, SS Sergeant Rudi Vieten took over command. Anti-tank grenadiers like SS Grenadiers Erich Jost and Günther Vogel destroyed tanks in brutal close combat. Second Lieutenant Goers described it as mental annihilation. One can tolerate the most terrible things, he later said, but no Russian tank survived. By the time the fighting stopped, 148 Soviet tanks had been destroyed, mangled wrecks all over the battlefield, but the price was steep. Many German soldiers fell. SS Corporal Hannes Duffer of No. 14 Company, SS 2nd Lieutenant Rudi Wetzel of No. 11 Company, and many others were killed. SS Grenadier Johannes Brauer, a veteran from the earliest days of the Eastern Campaign, recalled the madness. T-34s burst over the ridge in waves, crashing into German positions and flipping into the anti-tank ditches. There were no Panzerfausts, only limpet charges. Chaos engulfed the line. Brauer was seriously wounded, blinded by splinters, and carried off the field by Captain Brüssel. Even Joachim Peiper himself was stunned by the speed and fury of the Soviet attack. Amid the storm of exploding tanks, burning vehicles and screaming men, he joined the fight not as a commander but as a grenadier. At one point he ran toward a passing T-34, climbed onto its turret under fire, threw a bundle of grenades inside and leapt off as it exploded. His adjutant, SS 2nd Lieutenant Werner Wolf, also rose to the occasion. With Company 13 leaderless after Vandt was wounded, Wolf took command, organising a defence under heavy fire. He retrieved weapons from burning APCs, placed anti-tank teams, and coordinated resistance against the Soviet onslaught. Wolf personally destroyed a T-34 and killed a Soviet general in hand-to-hand combat with the officer's own dagger. That evening, the shattered Soviet armoured corps lay in ruins, and the front line had been restored, largely due to Wolf's leadership. Peiper recommended him for the Knight's Cross that same day. SS Lieutenant Colonel Frey, commander of the 1st SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, observed APC drivers ramming Soviet tanks in desperation. It was madness, but also a testament to the will to survive. SS Corporal Erhard Knuffel of No. 11 Company recalled how the Grills and SP guns began to fire directly into the mass of enemy armour. As the attack stalled, Soviet vehicles exploded in blinding flashes. Knuffel was wounded while applying a dressing. As he stumbled toward cover, he found 2 unarmed Soviet tank crewmen already hiding in the same hole. Peiper later wrote of SS Captain Paul Gould. During the chaos with tanks rolling through the German lines, Gould led from the front, organising defences, moving between foxholes and distributing weapons from destroyed vehicles. Even after being wounded, he rallied men for a counterattack that ultimately restored the front. Among those who destroyed Soviet tanks were SS Senior Sergeant Adolf Sellmeyer, who took out 2 T-34s with limpet mines, 19-year-old Helmuth Kohler, who destroyed 2 tanks with bundled charges, and SS Grenadier Rudi Nadler, who claimed his 3rd tank of the campaign. Even a medical orderly from No. 7 Company knocked out a Soviet tank that day. War correspondent Dr. Herbert Schramm described the morning as a blur of artillery, smoke and steel. Tanks rolled over trenches, earth fell from overhead beams and vehicles burned all around. Soldiers scrambled for weapons and explosives, struggling to load malfunctioning anti-tank guns, while others sprinted through smoke to retrieve grenades. The battlefield was choked with poisonous yellow mist, the breath of war itself. Through it all, Soviet armour pressed forward at full speed, only to be met by a mix of limpet mines, gunfire and raw desperation. In the trenches, a commander stood calmly with a carbine fitted with a grenade. As a T-34 thundered past, he fired into its engine block, bringing the monster to a halt. "This day counts toward the close combat class, men," he shouted, but his soldiers were too busy fighting to hear. Reinforcements arrived. Shell-damaged Panzers evacuated the wounded, including officers with bandaged eyes and blood-stained pistols. SS Lieutenant Rudolf von Ribbentrop destroyed 14 tanks that day and was awarded the Knight's Cross 3 days later. His platoon leader, SS Lieutenant Walter Malkow, accounted for 7. SS Lieutenant Colonel Krass, commander of the 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment, was wounded by a shell fragment under the eye, but refused to leave the field. That day alone, the 2nd Regiment destroyed 143 tanks in close combat. Across the division, the Leibstandarte knocked out 192 Soviet tanks in a single day. At Klenovoy, the rear echelon of No. 14 Company remained behind. There, the daughter of the village mayor laid flowers on the graves of the fallen each morning, reading the names aloud. Some of those names she had once known personally. By 17th July 1943, the Leibstandarte had been pulled out of the line. Their armoured group withdrew to positions west of Tetrovino. The toll had been heavy. In a final report, SS 2nd Lieutenant Gurs reflected on the cost: 15 dead, 35 wounded. SS Corporal Hannes Duffer had fallen on the last morning. Company troop leader Corporal Kamprad was seriously wounded. Gurs himself had ruptured his eardrum on the 13th of July and sustained cuts to the neck. "They were grim days," he wrote, "but full of proud victories. We cut ourselves off from the enemy and no one knew to where. We had 2 days of peace and quiet. How our men have grown old." Despite the intensity of the fighting, none of the 6 Grill assault guns had been lost to enemy fire. All had been hit by shrapnel or shells, yet they remained in action, a testament to their resilience and the crews that manned them. On 17th July, Peiper awarded Gurs the Iron Cross First Class and promoted him to Command No. 13 Company. That night, the unit set off for new positions west of Bielgorod. Whispers among the ranks suggested their next destination: Stalino. The 12-day tank battle had ended. On the barrel of his grill, Gurs painted 2 white rings and the silhouette of a T-34, visual marks of confirmed kills during the battles of 12th and 13th July. For those engagements, he was credited with his 31st and 32nd close combat days. He was now 21, but a worsening infection in his right arm, the result of earlier wounds, forced his evacuation. On 17th July, he was flown by Ju-52 to the military hospital in Kharkov. Even in the air, Russian anti-aircraft fire harassed the aircraft. From his seat, he watched tracer fire streak toward them. At the hospital, he met SS Lieutenant Georg Preuss, still recovering from a gunshot wound to the neck. In Kharkov, he experienced firsthand the tight bond between SS officers and their men. One day, SS officer Konrad Nickel appeared in the hospital ward with a list of names. He told them to go absent without leave that very night and make their way to a secret location in the city. There, an SS lieutenant would guide them onto a transport train heading back to the division in Italy. There were no papers, no official orders, yet everything went as planned. On 24th July, Gurs rejoined the Field Convalescence Company and boarded the train 6 days later. As the train passed through Upper Silesia, SS Captain Robert Arthecker arranged a leave pass for him. On 1st August, Gurs went home. Back at Bielgorod, the battalion had already boarded the train marked Lightning Arrow. On 29th of July, Gurs noted in his diary, "At 0300 hours we began loading and left the station at 0838. A strange feeling. This time, I had left so many good men behind." Kamprad and Bachmann had both succumbed to their wounds. The graves of Dufert and Dreyer were now behind enemy lines. Gurs asked himself what every survivor eventually does. Why was it him who lived? As we close this journey through Kursk, it's important to remember what we've just uncovered goes far beyond tanks and tactics. Beneath the steel, beneath the endless roar of artillery, was something rarely explored: man's terrifying ability to go beyond himself. In this battle, soldiers fought not just armies but exhaustion, pain, fear, and hopelessness. They fought with ruptured eardrums, shattered limbs, bloodied faces, and still they advanced. What we've uncovered isn't just military history, it's a raw portrait of human resilience pushed to its absolute limits. We've told the story of men like Gurs, who refused to yield when his commander shouted, "Go! Go!" We've seen Peiper lead his battalion with fire in his eyes, driving forward into the meat grinder with unrelenting speed. We've read the letter of Werner Wolf to his love Helga, written just minutes before his unit was thrown into the abyss. These are not just names, these were men, and they faced something that only war can summon. That strange, awful transformation where a man becomes more than flesh, more than fear. He becomes will, pure, terrible will. The Russian poet Alexander Tverdovsky once wrote, "War, it's not two armies clashing, it's a man meeting his own fate." And at Kursk, thousands of men met theirs. We so often speak of Kursk as numbers, tanks, divisions, kilometers of trench. But today we looked at what it really was. A struggle that brought out something almost unnatural, a fury, a spirit, a drive to destroy or be destroyed. This was war in its most primal form, and this was the story of Kursk, told not just through facts, but through the men who lived it. And while most of us will never face a battlefield like Kursk, there's something we can take from it. The resolve, the grit, the unbreakable drive to keep moving forward even when the world feels like it's falling apart. That spirit lives on, whether you're facing hardship, self-doubt, or moments where giving up feels easier. Remember these men. Remember Gurs with blood pouring from his arm, still holding the line. Remember the soldier clutching a letter, thinking of home before the storm. They didn't stop, and neither should you. We all have our battles, but we also have that same fire. Use it. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, taught you something new, or gave you a glimpse into a forgotten corner of history, make sure to subscribe. Your support helps keep these stories alive, and there are many more still to be told. Until next time, take care, stay strong, and I'll see you in the next one.